The sound of the Jericho trumpet is one of the most iconic noises of the Second World War, signalling the attack of the unmistakable Stuka dive bomber. First seeing action in the Spanish Civil War in 1938, the Junkers Ju-87 was one of the first monoplane dive bombers to see service. The name Stuka is a shortened form of the German term for dive bomber, Sturzkampfflugzeug. A simple and robust design was called for. Strong, fixed undercarriage was chosen over more complex retracting undercarriage, which also took up more internal space. An inverted gullwing design increased clearance underneath the fuselage for mounting of a larger payload. The Stuka saw service through the entirety of the Second World War, although production halted in 1944 in favour of ground attack variants of the Focke-Wulf 190. Early in the war, the Stuka was vital with blitzkrieg doctrine. Without air superiority, however, the Stuka was very vulnerable to fighter attack. It was a large target and much slower than most fighters of the time, especially later in the war. The first variant featured in War Thunder is the B-2. The B-series was the first mass-produced variant, featuring a newer, more powerful engine, the Junkers Umo 211D, producing around 1200 horsepower. The landing gear and elements of the fuselage were simplified to speed up the production times. The B-series also introduced the so-called Jericho trumpet, a propeller-driven siren that produces the very distinctive whining when the aircraft exceeds a certain speed. By the end of 1941, however, the siren was no longer present on most Stukas. The initial intimidation and effect on morale wore off as the enemy got used to it, and perhaps more importantly, the drag caused by the siren could reduce the top speed by up to 25 km an hour. The B-2 is a good payload for its battle rating, but it's easy prey for enemy fighters, just like all of the Stukas. After the B-2 is the R-2. There are few, if any, major changes between the B and the R series, the main difference being the R series could utilise wingtip fuel tanks, and therefore had a longer potential range. The R in fact stands for Reichsweite, meaning operational range. The R2 has a strengthened airframe, allowing it to safely dive at speeds of up to 600 km an hour or 370 miles per hour. The R2 can also hook up the huge 1,000-kilo bomb, one of the largest bombs a single-engine aircraft can carry in War Thunder. Performance is dramatically reduced, however, due to the immense weight and size of the bomb, but its power and blast radius are unrivaled at this tier. Next is the D series. After it was clear that no successor to the Ju-87 was in sight, the decision to develop the Stuka further was carried forward. The D-series introduced a more aerodynamic cockpit with better visibility, as well as refinements to the location of the oil coolers. The gunner's 7.92mm machine gun was replaced with the twin-barrel MG81Z. A new engine, the Jumo 211J, slightly increased power, and bomb-carrying capacity saw a large increase. Up to 4,000 pounds was now possible, compared to the B-series maximum of around 1,100 pounds. The range was also better compared to the Model B. The first variant in game, the D3, features improved armour protection over the base model, increasing weight but of course improving protection. The D5 follows, and features greatly increased offensive armament, introduced on the D4 model, in the form of two MG151 20mm cannons with 500 rounds per gun, offering a large improvement in effectiveness against ground targets, and, should the situation arise, other aircraft. The D5's wings were also 2 feet longer than previous models. Finally is the G series. By 1943 the Stuka was largely obsolete, but there was still no real replacement ready, at least not in large numbers. The airframe found a new lease of life as an anti-tank plane, carrying a pair of 3.7mm board cannon under the wing, and with tungsten carbide armour-piercing rounds, was effective against all but the heaviest Russian tanks in attacks from aside or above. Most Stuka Gs were in fact conversions of earlier models, and many early production Gs were simply Model Ds with the 37mm guns fitted under the wings. The G2 used the D5 airframe with extended wings, but was otherwise identical to the G1. Some Stuka Gs took part in the Battle of Kursk. In the hands of Stuka aces like Hans Ulrich Rudel, the Stuka G was very effective and knocked out large numbers of Soviet tanks. Those with earlier models, it was still a big, slow and vulnerable target. By the time production finished in September 1944, some 5,700 Stukas had been built in total. Despite being succeeded by aircraft like the Focke-Wulf 190F, it saw service until the end of the war. It was a pivotal weapon in Germany's early conquests and proved vital in any large-scale offensive, but as the tide of war turned, its usefulness in a largely defensive role severely diminished, and by the war's end it was very much obsolete. Despite this, it remains one of the most iconic and infamous aircraft of World War II.